Layla Harris has always been more than just an older sister to Nicole. Their mother died when Nicole was a teenager, and from that moment on, Layla became the only significant figure in her life. Layla took on the role of parent, nurturer, and protector, supplanting in Nicole's memory even those rare people who came to her aid during their difficult years. Layla was everything: a support, a comfort, a hope, and a source of love. Nicole grew up under her attentive gaze, feeling safe and secure. The dark-skinned Harris family lived in a quiet neighborhood of a small town in the state of Louisiana, where time seemed to flow slowly. People lived in a measured way and did not hurry anywhere, but in the house of Layla and Nicole, everything was always different. Layla grew up motivated and hungry for success. Her desire for success and independence shaped her personality from a young age. She managed to become a lawyer, which enabled her to provide for Nicole financially. Devoting all her time to her, Nicole, on the other hand, was a creative and dreamy person who spent her days painting and making beautiful things. She found peace in art, while Layla found peace in controlling her life. As Nicole came of age, their relationship began to change. Layla had long since stopped seeing her as just a little sister, and Nicole, immersed in the world Layla had created for her, didn't even notice how that closeness had grown into something more. Layla surrounded Nicole with care that went beyond sisterly love. Her caresses became more intimate, and touches longer and warmer. At first, Nicole was not frightened by it. On the contrary, she was grateful that Layla was always there for her, that she supported her in all her endeavors and was always ready to listen. Nicole was dependent on Layla, not realizing that this dependence had been built up over the years. At some point, the lines between sisterly love and something more were erased. Layla gave Nicole gifts that meant more than simple acts of caring. She knew which dresses Nicole loved, which flowers made her smile, and how to make Nicole feel like she was the only one in the world. It was more than just a big sister duty. It was a display of deep and passionate love. Nicole, despite her inner insecurities, was used to this relationship. The first time Layla kissed her, it was no surprise. Nicole responded, though her heart was racing with doubt. It didn't seem wrong, for Layla had replaced everyone for her. No one cared for her like Layla did. In moments of closeness, Nicole forgot all questions and fears. Layla was her world. They spent all evenings and weekends together, cuddling on the couch or taking long walks in the park. Layla showed care and love in every way possible, making Nicole feel needed and loved. Nicole didn't know what love was like outside of these walls. She didn't know what it was supposed to be like in reality. Her world was limited to Layla, and it seemed natural to her. However, things soon began to change. Nicole got a job at an art gallery where she met David Michaels, a young man who helped with organizing exhibitions. Their acquaintance was casual. They crossed paths at the card rack and began discussing new arrivals of paintings. David was the opposite of Layla. Soft, sensitive, and incredibly patient. He fell in love with Nicole at first sight, struck by her beauty and inner tenderness. Nicole, accustomed to being cared for only by Layla, did not pay much attention to him at first, but gradually began to notice how easy and free she felt in his presence. David was so far removed from her and Layla's world that Nicole began to dream of something else. They started dating, and Nicole felt something new, a feeling she'd never experienced around Layla. It was something different, light, innocent, unburdened by the secret expectations and heaviness of a relationship with her sister. In those moments with David, she felt different, free from the unwritten laws Layla had set up. The more Nicole spent time with David, the clearer she realized that her relationship with Layla was unhealthy. What she used to take as a show of care and love now seemed like something overwhelming. Layla was no longer her sister and protector. She had become her parole officer. Nicole felt her world shrinking to the confines of the house where Layla reigned supreme. At first, these thoughts made her feel guilty. After all, Layla had done so much for her. She had replaced her mother, raised her up, given her a chance to live and grow. But now Nicole realized that this care had its price. The more Nicole opened up to David, the further she drifted away from Layla. But Layla was too smart not to notice the change in her sister's behavior. She sensed Nicole's coldness, her desire to break free, her interest in life outside their home. Layla was jealous, but instead of figuring things out directly, she preferred to proceed subtly. Layla tried to restore their former closeness by insinuating that no one else could love Nicole as much as she did. Nicole felt the pressure building. Her thoughts constantly vacillated between wanting to be with David and feeling indebted to Layla. She began to avoid moments of intimacy with her sister, excused by fatigue or busyness. Layla, though she didn't show it, was beginning to lose patience. She couldn't understand how someone like David could claim Nicole's heart. It was impossible. Wrong. One night, as they sat on the couch in the quiet twilight of their living room, Layla approached Nicole from behind and gently put her arm around her shoulders, trying to bring back the intimacy of before. But Nicole recoiled. Her body instantly tensed, and she said sharply, "Layla, please don't." Those words stabbed Layla like a knife. Nicole had never spoken to her so coldly before. Layla tried to hide her emotions, but deep down she knew she was losing control of her sister. That night was the first time she thought about the fact that if Nicole left, she would lose not only her sister, but the whole meaning of her life. Each day, Nicole grew closer to David, their relationship growing stronger. She felt a freedom she had never experienced with Layla. Everything seemed easier with him. David was attentive to her words, never pressured or demanded anything Nicole wasn't ready to give. They spent time together in the park, discussing her paintings, dreaming about the future. Nicole began to feel that this is what a relationship should look like. Easy, harmonious, built on mutual understanding. With David, Nicole saw an opportunity for a new life, normal, healthy, without the constant tension and obligations imposed by Layla. They met more and more often, at work, in cafes after her shifts, even on weekends, when Nicole made excuses for Layla. Gradually, she began to realize that it wasn't just a crush. Her feelings for David were real, genuine, something that couldn't be said for what she felt for her sister. For the first time in her life, Nicole felt the desire to live for herself and not for others. Layla, however, could not help but notice the change in Nicole. She saw how she was staying late at work more and more often, how her phone had become an almost constant companion, always on vibrate, always somewhere near. Nicole became less available, increasingly shying away from the time they used to spend together. Layla, being experienced and perceptive, realized that something was changing. Jealousy grew within her like an inevitable anger that she could barely contain. One evening, when Nicole stayed late at the gallery, Layla decided to ask her a question that had been on her tongue for a long time. "Were you seeing him again?" Her voice sounded calm, but there was tension in it. Nicole froze, feeling her heart start to beat faster. She hadn't expected Layla to ask it so bluntly. "Who are you talking about?" Nicole answered, trying to hide her nervousness. "You know who you're talking about, Nicole. I'm talking about David." Layla stepped closer, her eyes full of control and displeasure. Nicole knew there was no hiding the truth from Layla. She couldn't pretend anymore. David meant too much to her to keep playing old games. "Yes, we're dating," she answered honestly. Layla was silent, looking at her intently, as if searching for the answers to 1,000 questions. Her face remained calm, but a storm was raging inside. She could feel Nicole's control slipping away. Their bond, which Layla thought was unbreakable, was beginning to crack at the seams. Layla used to be able to manipulate Nicole by reminding her of years of caring and support, but now something was different. Nicole was no longer a girl who could be subjugated. Layla tried to take one last step toward bonding. She sat down next to Nicole, taking her hand. "You do realize that no one is going to take care of you the way I do, right? No one knows you better than I do, Nicole. You owe me everything you have." Those words were as precise as the knife Layla intended to plunge into her sister's heart, reminding her of the enormous responsibility that had weighed on Nicole all these years. But they didn't work this time. Nicole had long been consumed with guilt and obligation to Layla, but now that she felt free in her relationship with David, the pressure seemed unbearable. She removed Layla's hand, stood up, and looked at her with a calmness that was surprising to herself. "I'm grateful for everything, Layla," she began, "but I can't go on living like this. It's not right. I don't want to continue our relationship. I want to be with David." I deserve a normal life. Those words, sounding so simple, hit Layla harder than any physical impact. Her heart clenched and rage flashed through her mind, but on the outside she remained just as cold and unfazed. Normal? Layla stood up and stepped closer, her eyes glittering with restrained fury. What does that mean, Nicole? We've been together all these years. I raised you, took care of you. And you're telling me that's all wrong now? Nicole met her gaze, and despite her fear, she didn't back down. Yes, Layla, it's wrong. I have to live my life. I should be with the one I truly love. Layla froze in place, her face stony. Inside her, she was struggling between the desire to keep her cool and the anger that was coming up. Nicole was no longer her little sister, her little girl who could be controlled. She had become a person in her own right, and that frightening realization was making Layla lose ground beneath her feet. Layla wasn't ready to give up so easily. She knew she had to do something to get Nicole back, to become the center of her universe again. Just the thought of Nicole going to David and starting a life with him made Layla feel acute pain and jealousy. She couldn't let that happen. Nicole belonged only to her. At night, lying in bed, Layla couldn't sleep. Her thoughts were preoccupied with only one thing: how to get Nicole back, how to make her realize that she belonged with Layla and not with this lowlife named David. Layla began to formulate a plan. Her love for Nicole was too strong to let her walk away. Ideas began to form in Layla's mind, one more dangerous than the other. The next day, when Nicole went to meet David, Layla decided to follow her. She had to see them together, had to make sure Nicole was really leaving her. She didn't fully believe it could have happened. Maybe Nicole was just confused. Maybe she could still make things right. Nicole and David sat in a cozy cafe on a street corner discussing her new painting. She was laughing, and he was looking at her with admiration. Layla stood on the sidewalk across the street, lurking in the shadows. Seeing them together was agonizing. Every movement Nicole made, every gesture she made toward David seemed like a betrayal. Layla had never seen her like this happy, free, carefree. It was wrong. Nicole couldn't be like this without her. Layla couldn't help herself. She walked into the cafe, heading straight for their table. Nicole looked up when she saw her and froze. "What are you doing here?" Nicole asked, her voice trailing off in surprise and alarm. Layla looked at her coldly, then shifted her gaze to David. "We need to talk, Nicole." Layla ignored David's presence, addressing only her sister. "Now." Nicole felt the tension envelop her from head to toe. She didn't know how to react. Fear of Layla and the desire to finally break free battled inside her. "Layla," she began cautiously, "we can talk at home. This isn't the place for—" "I said now, Nicole." Layla's voice sounded firm and determined. She wasn't going to back down. Her rage was ready to burst out, but for now she was still holding it in check. David stood up and gently intervened. "Maybe you should let Nicole decide when and who she should talk to." Layla turned sharply toward him, her gaze full of contempt. "You have no right to interfere. Nicole is my sister, and this is none of your business." Her voice sounded low, almost a hiss. Nicole realized at that moment that this wasn't going to end peacefully. She saw Layla lose control, and fear unfolded inside her. Layla had never been like this before. Nicole stood between two worlds, trying to make a choice that would change her life. After that meeting at the cafe with Layla, the tension between them had become almost unbearable. Layla tried to regain control over her sister, but Nicole was already halfway to a new life, to David, to freedom. Even with all her determination, however, she was plagued by fear of what Layla might do when Nicole finally decided to end their relationship. Every time Nicole looked into Layla's eyes, she saw not only the sister who had raised her, but the person who had become more than just a close relative to her. This relationship had long ago gone beyond normalcy, but Nicole didn't know how to get out of it. Even her love for David couldn't erase the feelings of guilt and obligation that Layla had instilled in her mind over the years. But one thought was clear: she had to leave. Each day, Nicole spent more and more time with David. She stopped coming home right after work, preferring to walk the streets with him, discussing plans for the future. They talked about how they could live together, travel, how she could finally leave behind the part of her life that was tied to Layla. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" David asked, as they sat on a park bench one day, his hand on her shoulder. "I realize it's not easy, but I want you to know that I'll always be there for you." Nicole looked up at him, her eyes full of gratitude. He had become to her what Layla had never been able to be, a rock. "I know," she replied, trying to smile. "I'm just afraid of what will happen when I finally tell her the truth." "You don't need to be afraid of that. You have a right to your life, Nicole. You deserve to be happy." Those words sounded so simple, but Nicole knew that realizing them would involve pain and possibly danger. Layla was unpredictable in her jealousy, and Nicole feared that her reaction might be more extreme than one might expect. Meanwhile, Layla was becoming more and more lost in her dark thoughts. She could see Nicole slipping away, her sister becoming a stranger, and it was driving her crazy. There was a tension in their apartment that you could literally feel in the air. Layla became withdrawn and avoided talking to Nicole, but deep down she was hatching a plan. Every time Layla saw Nicole about to leave the house, her heart ached. She knew where Nicole was going, knew that David, this stranger who had stolen her sister from her, was waiting for her there. The jealousy and fear became unbearable. Layla couldn't imagine her life without Nicole. They were inseparable, her life completely dependent on her sister's presence by her side. And if Nicole left, Layla would be left completely alone. One night, Layla couldn't contain her feelings any longer. She sat in the dark in their shared apartment, and thoughts one after another passed through her mind like waves. Nicole returned later than usual. Her face was tired, but her eyes read determination. She looked as if she had already made up her mind. "I want to talk to you," Nicole said quietly as she entered the room. Layla, sitting on the couch, looked up, her eyes darkening. "About what?" she asked. Her voice was icy, but underneath it was a hurricane of emotion. "About us." Nicole took a deep breath. "I think we need to stop this, Layla. This whole thing is wrong. I can't live like this anymore." Layla didn't answer right away. Her gaze went blank, but behind that blankness was rage. She got up from the couch and approached Nicole, her movements slow, almost predatory. "Do you want to leave?" she said at last, her voice so quiet that Nicole could barely hear it. "Yes," Nicole said, trying to stay calm, though she was trembling with fear inside. Layla froze for a moment, then stepped closer, her face only a few centimeters from Nicole's. "You can't just walk away, Nicole. I won't let you." Those words made Nicole freeze. She realized that Layla wasn't serious about letting her go, that she was never going to let her go without a fight. Nicole took a step back, trying to avoid this close contact, but Layla grabbed her arm. "You don't realize what you're doing. You belong to me. You're mine, Nicole. You can't just go to him." Layla said it like it was an immutable law of nature that Nicole belonged to her. Nicole tried to free herself, but Layla squeezed her hand tighter. "Layla, you can't do that," Nicole started to say, but Layla interrupted her. "I can't? Do you really think I'm going to let you go? After everything I've done for you? After all these years?" Her voice grew louder. It shook with contained rage. Nicole felt the situation spinning out of control. She wanted to say something to calm Layla down, but she didn't know what could calm her down at this moment. "Layla, please, you have to understand." Her voice trembled. She realized that any answer she gave could only increase the tension. Layla looked at her and her eyes became even darker, as if all the light had gone out in them. Nicole realized that this conversation was not going to lead to anything good. Her heart was racing, and all her instincts were screaming that she needed to leave and as fast as possible. "We can't go on like this," Nicole tried to speak again, her voice full of desperation. But Layla couldn't hear her anymore. Everything was burning inside her, the pain, the jealousy, the fear of losing Nicole forever. She couldn't let that happen. If Nicole decided to leave, no one else could own her. She belonged only to Layla, forever. 2 days later, Nicole was found dead in her apartment. The crime scene was eerily quiet. Nicole was lying on the living room floor, her body obscured by the semi-darkness. At first glance, it looked like a burglary. The doors hadn't been broken into, but the room was an obvious mess. Belongings scattered, books thrown off shelves, windows thrown open. The cops walked around the apartment trying to find any clues. No one knew exactly what had happened that night. No witnesses, no apparent motive. Nicole's body was discovered by her work friend, who came to visit when she didn't show up for her morning shift. "Jesus," she whispered when she saw the body on the floor. Nicole's face was a mask of horror, as if she had seen something she couldn't fully comprehend. There were no obvious signs of struggle on her body, only a barely visible mark on her neck. The sun's rays shone through the curtained windows of their apartment, giving the room a faded, ominous hue. The room that had once been the sisters' home now seemed lifeless. The streets outside the window continued to live their usual lives, but inside the apartment it was different. Everything was frozen in anticipation. Nicole was dead, and her absence loomed over the space with an oppressive sense of irreversibility. The air seemed to grow heavy, as if the house itself had absorbed the weight of the tragedy that had occurred here. Detectives Marcus Hill and Kayla Brown arrived on the scene hours after the body was discovered. The murder of a beautiful young woman in such a respectable neighborhood immediately caused a great response. Kayla, slender and calm, approached the scene with an analytical look. Her dark eyes didn't miss a single detail. Marcus, her partner, was older and more experienced. His growing gray hair gave away his long years of service, but that didn't make him any less attentive. They looked around the apartment, shared photos of the sisters, cozy furniture, signs of their life together everywhere. Kayla stopped in front of a picture of Nicole and Layla taken at a party. Nicole was smiling, and Layla was standing next to her, her arm wrapped tightly around her sister's shoulder. "The murder looks very personal," Kayla remarked quietly, not taking her eyes off the photo. "So much anger, and no logic in ending it that way." "I agree," Marcus nodded. "But we have yet to find out who was capable of such a thing. For now, all the theories remain in play." They moved to the kitchen where they found some small clues. A broken cup on the floor, dirt marks left by someone's shoes. Marcus leaned over and scrutinized the chip on the cup. "It wasn't a robbery," he observed. "It's too neat. No sign of a struggle except for these little things." Kayla walked through the kitchen and stopped at the window, pulling open the curtain. Her gaze drifted to the street. "This was planned," she said thoughtfully. "Whoever did it didn't leave much of a trail, but it looks too smooth." The first interrogation started quickly. The first to be called in was David, who was still in a state of shock. His face was pale and his hands were shaking as he sat down in front of the detectives. "Tell us what you knew about Nicole," Marcus asked, turning on the recorder. David swallowed nervously, his eyes reddening with tears. "We used to date," he began slowly. She was amazing, kind, caring. We met at an art club, and ever since then I fell in love with her. I can't believe it happened." Kayla watched his reaction carefully, but his pain seemed genuine. "When was the last time you saw Nicole?" she asked. "Last night," David answered. "We had dinner together, and then I took her home, and then I just went back to my place." "Did Nicole mention anything about her problems with anyone? Maybe she had enemies?" Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly, watching David's face. "No, she never mentioned anything like that." David shook his head. "But—" He hesitated for a moment, his gaze falling to the table in front of him. "Her sister Layla. They had a strange relationship. I don't know how to explain it, but it wasn't normal sisterly affection." Kayla and Marcus looked over at each other. "What do you mean by weird relationship?" Kayla clarified. "They were too close," David said quietly. Layla was always controlling her somehow, as if she couldn't let Nicole be herself. Nicole said that Layla had literally raised her, replaced her mother, and she felt indebted to her. But, I saw the way Layla looked at her. There was more to it than that. The detectives wrote down everything he said. After that, they headed to the next interrogation, Layla herself. When Layla entered the office, her steps were confident. She sat down across from the detectives with a cold-blooded expression on her face. Tall, with straight shoulders, she seemed to be in complete control of the situation. "I don't know anything about what happened to my sister," she said without much emotion, her arms crossed over her chest. "I left the house when she was already in bed. We didn't have any fights." Marcus looked at her carefully. "Did you have a close relationship with Nicole?" "Of course," Layla replied. "I raised her. She was everything to me. How could I hurt her? Her words sounded too confident, too calm for a woman who had just lost her sister. Marcus frowned, and Kayla continued to write down her statement. Were you aware that Nicole was dating David? How did you feel about that? Kayla asked the question surprisingly softly, not taking her eyes off Layla. Layla nodded briefly. I knew, but it didn't matter to me. I was glad she was happy. The detectives, however, had a lingering feeling that Layla was hiding something. Her demeanor was overly perfunctory, as if she had rehearsed her answers. When the interrogation came to an end, Kayla and Marcus looked at each other with the same look in their eyes. Layla was clearly hiding something. The detectives decided to meet with the sisters' friend, Ella Jameson, who was close to both Layla and Nicole. Ella met them in her small apartment, clearly nervous. I've known Nicole since she was a little girl, she began in a shaky voice. We've always been close, but her relationship with Layla. It was something strange. Layla had always kept Nicole on a short leash, even as an adult. I couldn't figure out what exactly was going on between them, but Nicole often looked depressed. Kayla and Marcus listened intently without interrupting. Ella continued. Nicole had been seeing David more often lately, and it clearly didn't sit well with Layla. I could see her getting angry with Nicole, though she never said it out loud. She just looked at her with a kind of desperation in her eyes. Do you think Layla might have been involved in the murder? Kayla asked quietly. Ella shook her head, but her gaze remained intense. I don't, but if anyone could have influenced her like that, it was Layla. That same day, the detectives returned to the sisters' apartment to examine it more thoroughly, and that's where they found the first physical evidence. Hidden in the closet, behind some old clothes, was a diary. Detectives Marcus Hill and Kayla Brown knew the case was getting more complicated with each new discovery. The more they delved into Nicole and Layla's lives, the clearer the picture of a broken sisterhood became. At first glance, ordinary sisters, they lived together and supported each other. But behind this outward idol was a dark and twisted history of manipulation, jealousy, and unhealthy attachments. The key was Nicole's diary and personal letters they found in a secret drawer. Flipping through the pages, Kayla couldn't contain her feelings of anxiety and pity for Nicole, her entries reflecting years of mental struggle. Nicole was searching for a path to independence, but Layla was always there, invisibly guiding her every action. The diary entries were not direct accusations, but between the lines was a desperate attempt to break free of her older sister's control. Nicole wrote about how her life had become a prison. I love Layla. She has always been everything to me, but sometimes I feel like she just doesn't want to let me go. I feel like I'm drowning next to her. Kayla set the journal aside, feeling a growing chill. Those lines were a cry for help, but it went unheard. Layla continued to deny her involvement in her sister's death, insisting on her love and care. She was calm and confident, her face showing no emotion, but Marcus sensed that behind that serenity lay something much deeper, something dark and dangerous. We found Nicole's diary, Marcus told Layla during the interrogation. Did you know about it? Layla didn't answer right away. Her gaze remained impenetrable, but Marcus noticed her fingers clenched nervously in her lap. It's just a diary, she finally said, her voice sounding surprisingly cold. Nicole was sensitive. She wrote stupid things when she was upset. You call that nonsense? Marcus opened the diary and read out the entry. Sometimes I feel like Layla will never let me go, as if her love is more than I can bear. Layla looked away, her jaw tensing. Nicole was too weak, she whispered quietly. She didn't know what she wanted. Kayla took a step forward, staring intently at Layla. Layla, we know that your relationship with Nicole wasn't just a sisterly one. You manipulated her since she was a little girl, controlling her every move. You were the only person she could trust, and you took advantage of that. Layla was silent. Her face remained cold, but something flashed in her eyes. The detectives knew her facade was starting to crack. You couldn't stand the fact that Nicole wanted to start her life with David, Kayla continued. You were afraid you'd lose her, that she'd slip out of your grasp. Marcus added, jealousy and fear of loss controlled you. You killed her because you couldn't bear the thought that she might be happy with someone else. Layla raised her head sharply. A flash of emotion flashed in her eyes that hadn't been seen until now. No one could love her like I do. she shouted, unable to hold back. No one! Those words, sounding like a desperate cry, were the point of no return. Layla finally stopped holding back. Marcus and Kayla stared at her in silence, knowing that the clue was close at hand. Nicole has always been with me, always, Layla continued, her voice shaking with emotion. I raised her, I took care of her, and she was mine. How could she just leave like that? How could she choose someone else? No one understands how much it hurt me to see her with that David guy. And so you decided that if she wouldn't be with you, she wouldn't be with anyone else? Marcus asked calmly. Layla didn't answer right away. Her hands were shaking, and her eyes were a mixture of rage and despair. She belonged to me, Layla whispered, as if justifying herself to herself. I did everything for her, and she just left me. The detectives got confirmation of what they suspected all along. Layla killed Nicole out of jealousy and fear. She couldn't accept that her sister had found personal happiness with another man, that her influence over Nicole's life had waned. Kayla turned back to the letters she had found in the apartment. They were Nicole's messages to herself, describing her struggle for independence. Nicole wanted to start a new life with David, but her attempts were doomed. Layla had manipulated her sister since childhood, instilling in her a sense of duty and dependence. Nicole couldn't break up with her, even when she realized it wasn't healthy, but Layla didn't see anything wrong with it. She considered her love for Nicole something sacred and couldn't allow anyone else to have a place in her life. It was an obsession, Marcus said as he and Kayla returned to the office to debrief. Layla hadn't just killed Nicole out of jealousy. She did it because she couldn't bear the thought of losing her. That explains everything, Kayla nodded. But how cruel it sounds. Nicole tried to break free, but she wasn't given the chance. Layla was arrested the next day. She didn't resist when the police came for her. Her face was impenetrable, but her eyes remained empty, like a person who had lost everything she had lived for. As they led her to the car, she didn't say a word. Only once, looking at Kayla, she whispered softly, "No one was supposed to love her but me."